The broadcast went out while I was still pinned under 40 meters of collapsed observation deck, and the words they used were Queen Ayatel Varen, lost in the second strike. Lost. Not dead. My court chose that word so they could leave without calling it abandonment. I heard it on the same channel I'd been screaming into for 6 hours, the one nobody was supposed to be listening to anymore. Static. Then my own steward's voice reading my eulogy in the clipped diplomatic register he used for treaties. Then nothing. Then the channel clicked back open and a man who was not supposed to exist said, I don't think you're lost. I think you're under something. I didn't answer right away. 6 months of silence does something to a person's voice. I'd spent that silence talking to a dead man, Kalev, my husband, gone in the first strike that took the Citadel's spine and half its crew with him, and I had stopped expecting anyone living to answer back. Say again, I managed. Staff Sergeant Reese Calder, ground relay, third watch. A pause, breath ragged with effort I could hear even through the wreckage. Command logged me dead an hour after they logged you. We are both real popular today. The Citadel had been my husband's command before it was the war's grave. Kalev built the observation tier with his own hands, said a queen who couldn't see the fleet coming wasn't fit to lead one, and then the fleet came anyway and the tier folded down through 6 decks like a closing fist, and I went down with it because I would not leave the room he died defending. Reese Calder climbed up through that fist for 4 hours. I know the math now, did it myself afterward with shaking hands. 4 hours, 6 collapsed decks, a leg broken in 2 places he didn't mention until the 3rd hour, and a command structure actively broadcasting that the climb was pointless because the woman at the top of it was already gone. He kept climbing. Every 20 minutes the channel buzzed and I told him where I thought I was, what I could hear, what kept shifting under the rubble in ways that scared me, and every 20 minutes he said some version of the same 6 words. Still coming. Stay where you are. Nobody asked him to. That's the part one couldn't get past, lying there with dust in my lungs and my husband's command tier crushing in around me like it wanted to finish what the fleet started. Reese Calder had no orders to find me. He had orders to fall back to the evac line with everyone who could still walk. He was logged dead, which meant on paper he didn't even have to follow those orders. Paper said he wasn't there to receive them. Why? I asked him, somewhere in the 3rd hour, when the shifting rubble had gone quiet and the quiet was worse than the noise. Are you doing this? Heard a queen on an open channel asking for someone to come get her, he said. Didn't sound like she expected anyone to. I didn't. Yeah, that's why. Halfway through the 3rd hour the deck above him let go. He told me about it after, flat, the way he told me everything, no weight added to make it sound worse than it was, though it was bad enough without help. A support strut he'd been using as a ladder rung sheared clean through and dropped 2 meters of plating down the shaft he was climbing, and he rode part of the fall with it rather than let it take him all the way to the bottom, caught a cable conduit with one arm, took the rest of the impact on the leg that was already broken, and didn't tell me any of it was happening until it was over. You went quiet, I said into the dead channel, when the static cleared and his breathing came back ragged and wrong. Bit of a detour. Sergeant. Still climbing, just climbing slower. And then, before I could push further, where are you? Talk to me. What's around you? I described the room because he asked, because the asking was its own kind of rope thrown down to where I was, twisted strategy table, my husband's chair pinned under a beam at an angle that made it look like it was kneeling, the cold coming up through the floor plates in a way that told me we were close to the Citadel's outer skin now, close to space itself with only metal and luck between us and it. He listened to all of it like the details mattered, like I mattered, and somewhere in the telling I realized I had stopped flinching every time the wreckage shifted, because his voice was steadier than the structure around me, and I'd started trusting it more. He reached me a little after the 4th hour, and the first thing he did was not kneel, not bow, not say my name like it was a relic. He put 2 fingers against the side of my throat to check my pulse, the way you'd check anyone's, and said, "Okay, you're alive. Let's keep you that way," and started clearing the beam off my legs like I was cargo worth the effort and nothing more complicated than that. I had been queen of the Varen remnant for 9 years. No one had touched me like I was simply a person who needed help in longer than I could remember. His leg gave out twice getting me down through the wreck. Both times he got back up before I could finish asking if he could. He was not young, grey at his temples, a scar through one eyebrow that pulled his expression slightly off-center, the kind of weathered calm that comes from a long career of bad days rather than one dramatic one. He didn't talk to fill silence. When he did talk it was short and useful. Which handhold would hold? which wouldn't, when to stop and breathe. You knew the tier, I said, on the second level down, when I recognized the corridor, Karlev's old strategy room, half buried, chart still pinned to a wall that was now a floor. Studied the schematics on the way up. Figured the fastest way to you wasn't always the safest way, but you'd been under there 6 hours and safety wasn't winning. That's my husband's room. He went still for half a second, the only time grief crossed his face for someone he'd never met. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it, and kept moving, because sympathy that stops the rescue isn't sympathy, it's theatre, and Reese Calder had no theatre in him at all. We came out through what used to be a maintenance airlock into grey daylight and the smell of scorched metal, into a camp of survivors who had already started grieving me in the past tense. My steward, Aldrich, was among them, the man whose voice I'd heard reading my own eulogy, and his face when he saw me alive did something complicated, relief tangled up with the visible math of having already moved on, already begun the succession conversations a queen's death requires. Your Majesty. He recovered fast, dropped to one knee in the ash. We feared the worst. We were preparing to. Leave, I said. I heard the broadcast. The fleet is still making passes. We had to think of the survivors who could still. You had to think of survivors who could still walk to the ships, I said, and I couldn't, so you wrote me off before you confirmed it. It wasn't rage. I was too tired for rage. It was just the plain shape of what had happened, said out loud so no one in that camp could pretend otherwise. Reese hadn't let go of my arm the whole time, not out of presumption, out of practical necessity, because my legs still weren't trustworthy, and Aldrich's eyes went to him then, cataloguing, ground relay rank insignia, no royal bearing, a stranger's hands on his queen. Who is this man? Aldrich asked, the way court officials ask questions that are actually accusations. The one who came back for me, I said, when the rest of you were already gone. Behind Aldrich, 2 of the camp's remaining guard had already started toward us with a stretcher, moving with the brisk efficiency of people who'd rehearsed this exact moment in the 6 hours they'd had to plan my absence, get the recovered body to the evac line, secure the succession, manage the optics of a queen who'd nearly died on a husband's grave. One of them reached for my other arm before I'd said a word about wanting to be moved. I haven't asked to be carried anywhere, I said, and the guard stopped, uncertain, looking past me to Aldrich for instruction the way they'd been trained to. That, more than anything, told me how close they'd come to deciding my fate without me in the room for it. Majesty, the ships are loading. Every minute we delay. Every minute you delay is a minute you spend remembering that I'm not cargo, I said. I walked into that tower a queen and I'll walk out of this camp the same way, on my own legs, beside the man who got them working again. If that costs us a minute, it costs us a minute. The last pass came in low while we were still standing there, that distinctive shriek the enemy ships make cutting atmosphere, a sound that every survivor in that camp had learned to flinch from in their sleep. Reese didn't flinch. He turned his body between me and the open ground in the half-second before anyone else moved. Not heroics, just reflex worn smooth by however many bad days had built that scar through his eyebrow, and got me down behind a fallen support strut while the pass screamed overhead and the camp scattered. It missed us. It was a scout pass, not a strike. The war's last gasp checking whether anything down here was still worth killing. When the sound faded, Reese was still half over me, breathing hard, leg buckled wrong beneath him, and he looked down and said, very quietly, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, "Still here. Still here." He helped me sit up against the strut. Around us the camp was reassembling itself, the way people do after the danger passes and the shame of having scattered sets in. Aldrich approached again, more careful this time. Majesty, when the evac ships return for the wounded, we should discuss the line of succession contingencies, given what nearly. Given that you already finished my eulogy, I said, before I was dead. I looked at Reese, who was watching me with the same steady, unhurried attention he'd used on every handhold in that collapsed tier, like I was a problem he intended to keep solving rather than a title he was waiting to address correctly. I'm not interested in contingencies built around a death that didn't happen. I'm interested in who was still climbing when everyone else had already written the speech. Your Majesty, he's not even. He's the only person in this camp who treated me as worth the 4 hours, I said. Everyone else treated me as worth a sentence. I know which one I trust. Aldrich didn't argue further. There wasn't an argument built that survived that math, and to his credit, he understood it once it was said plainly, the kind of court official whose failures are failures of imagination rather than malice, and who, faced with the plain shape of his own broadcast, looked properly ashamed of it. I turned to Reese. Staff Sergeant. Command has you logged dead. Yes, So do I, technically, as of about 3 hours ago. A ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. Seems we are both already gone. Whatever we do next, no one's expecting it. He considered that with the same unhurried weight he gave everything. What do you want to do next? I had spent 6 months talking to my husband's ghost in an empty observation tier, and 6 hours certain I would join him there, and 4 hours listening to a stranger refuse to let either of those things be true. I did not want a crown restored on a wreck that no longer had a throne worth sitting in. I did not want Aldrich's contingencies or a court that had already drafted my obituary once and would draft it more carefully next time. I want to stay where the climbing happened, I said. Not the tier. Here. With whoever's still standing in it. Reese didn't say anything grand. He wasn't a man built for grand. He just shifted his weight so his good leg took the strain, settled in beside me against the fallen strut like he intended to be there a while, and said, "Then I guess I'm still on the clock." Above us the sky stayed quiet. No more passers came. Somewhere behind us the camp was rebuilding itself in the grey daylight, survivors finding their footing the way survivors do, and Aldrich was already, in his careful diplomatic way, beginning to draft something that wasn't an obituary this time. By evening the guard who'd reached for my arm came back, not with a stretcher this time but with 2 ration packs and a blanket, and set them down beside us without a word, which was its own kind of apology. Reese split the ration pack in half before I could tell him I wasn't hungry, the way a man does who spent a career making sure the people around him eat first, and we sat against that fallen strut while the camp's fires came up one by one across the wreckage, small defiant points of light against a sky that had tried twice that day to put them out. I didn't need a crown restored to know I'd been found. I'd been found the moment a dead man's voice came through a dead channel and told me to stay where I was, because he was still coming. He kept his word. That was the whole of it, and it was enough.